how are you?
I'm great. It's lovely to meet you. I think this is our first time interacting online, and I mean, goodness me, there is a lot here to talk about right now. We've got the Strait of Hormuz seemingly being reclosed, if it was ever closed or reopened. Obviously, the fog of war around that. Lebanon is a big flashpoint right now, and a lot of concerns around the ceasefire holding. So I think just diving straight into it, really, you've been very active on this from different angles. And when you look at what's happened in the past 24, 36, 48 hours, what have you mainly been focusing on? What are your biggest concerns right now?
So my biggest concern since the ceasefire was announced is, will it hold? Is this a good step on the road to more good things, or is this temporary, or is it not even real? It looks to me like the US and Iran are coming at it from slightly different angles. I'm not sure they're viewing this the same way. And it also feels like we've really given something to Iran in terms of this ceasefire. We are fully admitting that Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. We are asking them to open it. We're giving them something for opening it, whereas that was not the case before this war started. And so those are the things that are really front of my mind right now.
I mute myself because we had a noise in the background. Now you're Director of Energy Security and Climate at Brookings, and one of the biggest concerns about all of this is the consistent provision and access to energy coming through the Strait. Now, I think the biggest sticking point through this, hopefully these negotiations that will start again on Friday, is around the Strait of Hormuz. I think that's going to be the biggest point of difference between the two. So can you take us through a little bit what you think either side is really thinking about this, be that from the United States and Washington where you are, but also from the Tehran and regime, government, whatever side?
Yeah, let's start with the Iranian side first. Iran cannot beat the US and Israel militarily, clearly, but it does have some really important weapons to engage in this conflict. The most important one is the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil and 20% of the world's LNG typically go through it. And so blocking the Strait of Hormuz is a serious economic weapon that Iran can use, even though it has a hard time defeating the US and Israel together militarily. So, I mean, I believe that Iran is going to continue to use the Strait as leverage for as long as it feels it needs to. On the US side, this is really interesting. I believe some things that are a bit different than what's coming out of the administration right now. I've heard President Trump say that we don't need to worry about the Strait of Hormuz. It's not about us because our oil doesn't come from there. And I think the thing that he misses is that oil is priced on a global market. We're seeing things things aren't equilibrated for the disruption that's happening right now. But at some point, this flows into oil prices everywhere. It doesn't matter whether or not we get our oil through the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is important for the United States and every other country in the world because oil prices are set globally. So you've got a bit of an asymmetric thing. Clearly, the US and Israel win militarily, but Iran has some serious cards to play, and they are certainly playing them.
But there seems to have been a deliberate mismatch. There was a lot of argumentation on the internet yesterday about whether the agreement was based on Trump's 15-point plan or Iran's 10-point proposal. And the Iranian subsequent 10-point proposal was quite, I think, deliberately vague. If you read the 10 points, especially around the Strait of Hormuz, it's around full passage access and also developing some kind of securitized system around there. But as the day has gone on now, there have been subsequent claims that the Trump has said that he agrees with the idea of a toll, or that the Americans and the Iranians are working together on some kind of toll. Do you have any particular thoughts on that? Any additional information I might have missed?
I have a lot of thoughts on that. I'm catching information at the same time as you do, so I don't have any particular insight on the particulars of that negotiation. But I want to focus on the differences between, say, February 27th and now.
Right.
On February 27th, before the conflict started, there was free navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. It wasn't controlled by any country. You have Iranian territory on one side and Omani territory on the other side, that little spit that
Right.
Oman has. And there's free navigation through the strait. Well, what we're talking about now is cutting a deal with Iran. We're bargaining over establishing navigation through that strait. We're admitting that Iran owns it. And we're talking about the potential for a toll on a natural waterway. I mean, it makes sense to have tolls on, the Panama Canal or the Suez Canal, because, they're man-made entities that need maintenance and running and all of that. But we're talking about Iran charging a toll for a body of water that it just sits on one side of. So we're agreeing that they control it by thinking about giving them a toll. And the other thing that we're doing that really strikes me as a bit crazy is think of the revenue that Iran will get from that toll. I mean, nothing is certain yet, but I've heard numbers of a couple $1 million per tanker or ship. I've heard $1 a barrel described. Those are kind of the same order of magnitude. This is a serious source of revenue for Iran. So we've gone in, we've destroyed all these programs. We don't want them to have a nuclear weapon. We don't want them to have a missiles program. But suddenly we're going to set up a big new source of revenue for them? I find that completely shocking.
But isn't it the case that the Iranians have been earning double the amount of money during this conflict that they were before February 27th, right? They're literally earning a hell of a load of income, which is going to be used to rebuild what is clearly a system that still functions. The press conference by Hegseth and General Kane earlier today, I think, was pretty clear. Trump had three main military objectives: destroy the Iranian ballistic missile and drone program, destroy the Iranian Navy, and destroy their defense industrial capacity. Well, we've had continuous drone and missile exchanges. I think they started within the first hour that the ceasefire agreement was set. So clearly the ceasefire is being violated, and clearly Iran is going to continue to close the strait. So they're going to continue to benefit from this either way, if they get a toll in a hypothetical arrangement, or if they just keep forcing the payment of ships that want to traverse it. Or what's your assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that you're saying. I mean, you talk about the three goals that Secretary Hegseth and the president have set. Okay, we've largely achieved those goals, but completely wiping out, particularly the drone program, it's really difficult to do. I mean, those are not complicated pieces of military equipment. You can assemble those in somebody's basement. How are we going to wipe out every basement in which drones could be assembled? The missile program may be a little bit easier, but it's not like Iran didn't know something like this could happen. Those are quite distributed, and it's not just big missiles. I mean, the F-15 that went down in Iran last Friday was taken down by a shoulder-fired missile. Are we going to be able to eliminate all of those? I mean, completely eliminating Iran's weapons program is an extremely difficult thing to do. And then you think of what we've given up in this conflict. We've de facto given Iran control of one of the most important trade choke points in the world. I mean, it really, okay, we've set back their weapons program, but I mean, if things go as they're looking right now, we've also set up a new revenue program for them to get it all back. And you're talking about the increased revenues that Iran has been generating. I was also shocked when we lifted sanctions on Iranian oil that was on the water. Part of the reason why they're making so much more money off of their oil is they had to sell it at a discount when it was sanctioned. They're selling it to refineries that are willing to take it on the down low. Whereas if it's unsanctioned, they can sell it at the market price. And the higher market price has happened because of the war. And so I see things we're doing just working at cross purposes, and it doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
But couldn't you argue that it doesn't really matter for the United States, right? You've worked in the US Department of Energy in your previous roles. So you're aware of the growth in energy independence, you could say, or autonomy that the American economy has benefited from. Part of the argument people claim about Europe is that America has been providing, as an alternative to Russian energy, American energy, and therefore it was, part of some, people claim the deep state, all that sort of stuff, that this was a ploy by America to force Europe to be more reliant
I don't buy that.
on America. No, I'm not surprised, but more my point is simply, for Trump, it doesn't really matter, right? He gets some money from the toll booth.
Well, let's think about this for a minute. I mean, you hear Trump talk not just about energy independence, but energy dominance. I really hate that term. And we have to talk about it differently in terms of oil and natural gas too. So let's start with oil. Yes, the U.S. is the world's largest producer of oil. We're now a significant exporter of crude oil and refined products. These things are all true. But oil is priced on a global market. The price that we get for our oil is checking for quality and transportation costs, the same price that everybody else gets for their oil. It's globally fungible, and oil prices are set globally. So you hear the president say, the Strait of Hormuz doesn't matter for us. Meanwhile, you see Americans complaining that gas is over $4 a gallon now, which I'm surprised is not higher. But that's because we are connected to the global market. On the natural gas side, it's quite different. The U.S. is a significant, in fact, the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas. And we're export limited. We have a lot of natural gas production in the United States, and all those LNG facilities are going as hard as they can. They're exporting every molecule of natural gas that they can, and still the U.S. has plenty of gas. And so we are insulated on the natural gas side. The thing that most voters care about, and the price that you see driving down the road, is gasoline or diesel prices. And those are completely connected to the world market, and we should care about what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz.
I agree that the trickle-down effect, the secondary knock-on effects are very clear. That I think a lot of people can unfortunately look at the first-order effects only, but it goes far beyond that. And the United States, some people claim that this is all part of a grand strategy towards dealing with China, that Trump has this desire to knock Venezuela and Iran out of the equation, to weaken China's supply chains, energy systems, and so on. Can you explain why that, I think, is a bit far-fetched, or do you think
that's... I can absolutely claim that that's far-fetched. And I think the situation is quite different in Venezuela and Iran. And I think one of the problems that we're having today is that folks in the administration wanted to equate those when that was a really bad thing to do. So let's start with Venezuela. I mean, Venezuela was relatively easy to sort of go in and at least knock out the top of their regime. They have significant oil reserves. However, their oil industry has been underinvested in for years and is held together with chewing gum and duct tape. And so bringing other oil companies in, including American ones, but also others, really could increase Venezuelan oil production, but over time, not quickly. That was never going to happen in Iran. In Iran, you have a regime that has, that believes that, they're divinely in charge of this country. I mean, that the regime is based on God and beliefs. We're not going to just be able to go in there and knock that out and install a different kind of government. I mean, these folks are fighting for their lives and their ideology, and they're not just fighting for oil. And so that was never going to work in Iran the way it actually did work in Venezuela. Not going to happen. But then this sort of idea that there's a game of 3 or 4D chess happening, and that America is doing this to weaken the Chinese, and I deeply don't buy that for a number of reasons. Probably the most important reason why, even if it was a strategy, I don't think it would work, is that if you look at Chinese energy policy and strategy, energy security has been top of mind for them for a long time. They've worked on diversifying their supplies, on working with the supplies they have domestically, because they've been really worried about their economic growth being derailed by some sort of energy crisis. They were more prepared for this than the rest of the world, because this has been top of mind for them for a while. And so you look at, let's say on the electricity side, what they've done is they've combined rapidly growing renewables with their indigenous coal generation. So they are somewhat protected, although they're a significant LNG buyer as well. They've been thinking about this for a long time, and their energy system is built around it. Somewhat true on the oil side. Additionally, I mean, oil is a transportation fuel. And so part of the reason, and one reason why China has gone so heavily into EVs and batteries and EV manufacturing, is they wanted to lead this industry that they saw as shaping the world. But it is also true that they do it for energy security reasons. China actually produces a significant amount of oil, but not nearly enough to cover its needs. And so it's an energy security strategy to lean more towards electric vehicles. And then that brings it over to renewables and coal that they control rather than oil that they do to a much lesser extent. And so I actually think China was better prepared for this crisis than the rest of the world in many important ways. And if the world reacts to this by saying, oh, wow, fossil fuels are riskier than we thought and perhaps more expensive in the future than we thought they were going to be, that's a win for China. So this was a strategy. I don't think it was a good one.
No, I just, on that point, and I'm not sure if there's a bit of it's your headphones, but there's a little bit of noise on your side. I think it's just like from the table maybe or something, but just
okay,
maybe it's your chair. Your chair's moving underneath the table.
Oh, maybe. Okay. Let me sit very still then.
No. I can
That's something I'm good at.
I'm not sure if people can hear that on the other side. I don't think it's me, but I just wanted to notify you.
No problem. We'll do what we can.
No, but on the situation, rumbling noise. But on the Chinese element, I was under the understanding that they had around 4 to 5 months worth of reserves, and after that, they would start feeling some degree of pressure. You don't find, was that the case? Is there something else there that I'm missing?
No, I completely agree with that.
How much could China endure this? And were they part of pressuring Iran to accept the ceasefire yesterday, as was reported by Associated Press, if I remember?
I don't have any more information than you or your listeners do on whether or not China was involved in pressure one way or the other on the ceasefire agreement. But I honestly think the whole world wants the Strait to be open again. I mean, so it wouldn't surprise me if they did, and that wouldn't necessarily be a nefarious thing. It is true that China has the world's largest oil reserves, and it kind of furthers the argument I made earlier that China has been super concerned about energy security for a long time. Diversifying has been one of their strategies, and keeping reserves has been another. So I think China is one of the best prepared countries in the world to deal with this.
Well, and then on the other side is, of course, Europe and Asia more broadly. There's been a growing concern around access to fertilizer for India. And the minute that Trump, what did he sign? One of those executive clauses to allow the loosening of sanctions pressure on Russia, we saw a notable amount of ships redirecting from China almost instantaneously to India because of that growing pressure. So when you look at the energy security across the world, based on different regions or specific countries, who really is suffering the most, but also would benefit from this ceasefire holding, even if they have poor relations with the Americans or Israelis or whatever?
Yeah. So I think the way to think about this, you hear President Trump say our oil doesn't come from there. That's an Asian and a European problem. It's a global problem, but it does matter where that oil usually goes in terms of just shipping times and having to rearrange oil supply, which takes a long time. Just for a little background, if you think about how long it takes an oil tanker to go from the Persian Gulf to various markets, it's a week or two to Asia, depending on where you are. It's more like 4 to 6 weeks to Europe or the Americas, depending on whether it goes through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal or whether it goes around the Cape of Good Hope. But so the first markets to be affected by real shortage.
We are live, we can see.
Sorry about that. My phone was ringing and I needed to make it stop. Okay, so the first countries to be affected by real shortage were the countries in Asia, because the lack of supply, in a sense, got there first. And so they would be, once supply is back again, they will be the ones who will benefit first, just because of the shorter shipping time, not because of any sort of geopolitical pressures or anything. It's easier to get there. It's also the reason why in other countries, we're not feeling a real shortage yet. Because if you think of that 3 to 6 week time frame, a lot of oil is still on the water on its way to those other markets. And so in a sense, the shortage hasn't gotten there yet. And so first to lose oil will be the first to get it back, purely in a supply point of view. And then everyone benefits over, the many months it'll take for the market to find a new equilibrium. But there's sort of short-term effects and longer-term effects.
But if you've got the growing, comments by Trump around not just European countries or NATO, but also towards Japan, Korea, countries that really were in a energy insecure environment, and he's threatening them, could we see a growing just divergence away from America as a provider of energy? Because they've benefited from that quite a lot, right? Or it goes.
I mean, I see the point of view in many countries of the security of fossil fuel supply being very different after this. I mean, the Persian Gulf producers have been seen as very reliable suppliers. That's going to change now, just because our thoughts about what can happen in the Strait have fundamentally changed. But with the US too, I mean, we've also been seen as a reliable, non-political provider of oil and gas. And so if this goes on, and if Trump continues to use our oil and gas supply as a cudgel to get other agreements out of countries, be they trade or something else, then we're not the apolitical, reliable supplier that we were either, and we're seen as less secure. So I really worry about that in this push for dominance, which has kind of a negative connotation to it. I don't like that term because it implies this kinds of things. We will lord our energy over you in a way that I find disturbing. I'd much rather we be the friendly market-based apolitical provider of fuel, and a provider, as an aside, that can do it with quite good environmental standards. I mean, we care about that in this country.
No, absolutely. But okay, then very simply then, who benefits the most in these kinds of conditions, in such energy crisis as this? Is this all part of a desire by the United States to try and force Europe to be more and more dependent on them because they don't have access to Gulf energy, the Qatari LNG, which was, an offset for the reduction of reliance on a Russian LNG? Who are the biggest beneficiaries, but also, or biggest winners and losers? Let's just put it like that.
Well, I gotta say, just as a preface, I don't think our leaders thought all the way through. I think they thought this would be quicker. I don't think that they thought the Strait would be blocked. I mean, it's shocking for me to say that.
I'm surprised to hear you say that, Samantha. I really am.
It's very painful to say that. But I've heard them say things like, we didn't expect that they'd block the Strait of Hormuz. We thought they would have capitulated by then. It's painful. Or we didn't think they'd strike out at their Gulf neighbors. And I was like, well, a lot of us thought that would happen. So, I mean, hardly anybody wins from this. This is just bad. But I will say that the more immediate winners from this are Russia and China. Russia, because this pressures the world to buy more Russian fuels because we're just short. Europe is saying we're still not buying Russian gas. We're out of that business. And I hope they stay that way. But there's pressure now with the loss of Qatari LNG to buy more fuels from other places. And then I think China is winning because, like I said before, China is one of the countries best prepared to deal with this disruption. And they've been so focused on alternative fuels, electric vehicles, renewable energy, and also coal, because they have a lot of it, that they're a little more insulated. I mean, obviously they're a big importer as well, but they've been thinking for a long time about how to insulate their economy from energy security concerns. So that's not what you want to hear.
As the host of the Global Gambit, I have to retain a certain degree of objectivity. I mean, I have my biases, of course, but I have to retain my sense of balance for sake of argument, right, Samantha? But we cover Russia and Ukraine a lot on the show, and my audience, I think, are very interested to understand just how far Russia can potentially benefit from this. They've been making $150 million a day, or they've made over $1 billion in the past week alone. the numbers vary a lot, but they're obviously significant for Putin's war chest and his capacity to sustain his war against Ukraine. So if we continue to see the ceasefire being volatile and Iran, choosing to disrupt or impede the flows through the Strait, what does that mean for Moscow? What does that mean for other major energy players, exporters?
Yeah, I'll respond quickly to your sort of objectivity question too, just for a second.
I
work for a nonpartisan organization as well. The opinions I state are mine, not those of my organization, but I'm also in the truth-telling business, and I'll be as honest as I possibly can in the conversation. So I mentioned earlier that Iran was making more money on its oil sales, in part because when we unsanctioned them, they could be sold at the market price. The same is true of Russian oil. We also removed sanctions on Russian oil that was on the water. And that same thing is true. You mentioned those ships turning around. Well, that oil no longer needed to be sold either on the down low or under the price cap. It could be sold at the market price because it was unsanctioned. And so you're right, that adds to Putin's sort of war chest. The other thing that I'll say is it really just depends on how long this goes on. If we continue to leave Russian energy products unsanctioned because we are concerned just about supply altogether, whether Europe takes back Russian pipeline supply, which I greatly hope it doesn't, but because of what's happened to Qatar, there will be political pressure to do so, and I hope the EU holds the line on that. The other thing that I'll say that's apart from energy markets is that the US is spending a lot of material in this war in Iran. A lot of interceptors, a lot of missiles, a lot of equipment that might have otherwise gone to Ukraine. Now we're looking, I don't know exact numbers on this, so I don't want to say we're short on material, but clearly we have less than we did before because we spent it in this conflict in Iran. And so that could be a rather indirect, but nonetheless important impact on the conflict in Ukraine.
I do worry about the spillover effects. Obviously, Zelensky was in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh, just a couple of days ago, end of last week. And I think that's quite notable for the relationship between those two. But on Saudi Arabia is obviously one of the great powers or regional players, aspiring to be hegemon. What do you think MBS's calculus is in this? They've seen a significant redirection of energy as a contingency plan, across Saudi Arabia. It's added an additional 2-3 days, let alone the cost and the logistics of it all. What do you think is going through the mind of MBS, Saudi Arabia, and their relationship to the United States, the petrodollar, all of that? I know it's a big question, but
it's a huge question, but it's a very sensible question, and I kind of see a couple sides of this. On the one hand, Saudi Arabia is the best prepared of the Gulf oil and gas producers because they have this 7 million barrel a day, roughly, pipeline that goes across the Arabian Peninsula to the Red Sea. And so that completely bypasses the Strait of Hormuz. And so that's the primary thing that, rather than the 20 million barrel a day disruption you would have if nothing came out of the Gulf, it's more like 11 or 12 million barrels a day. That's the main thing. So the Saudis are hurting, but better off than their neighbors because they built this pipeline. And so that's important to consider. Although, Saudi also needs the revenues probably more than any of the other Gulf producers. So this is a tough one for the Saudis. There's no love lost between them and the Iranians. On the one hand, maybe they would like to see us finish the job and have Iran finish the job and be less of a threat to Saudi territory than it has been in the past. This is not the first time we've seen them attack Saudi energy facilities. The flip side of that is we, the United States, dragged the Saudis into a conflict that they didn't sign up for. They had no part of this. They were innocent bystanders until the Iranians started lobbing missiles and drones at their facilities. So it is difficult to think about how MBS and his government might think about this, because I can see two sides to it. And there's also, you can't go back. We're here now. And so I think their opinion on this conflict might be different now than it was before it started. So we're in a different place and you can't go back and change the past. But
if I could just follow up on that though, because obviously
yeah.
we saw in Yemen, and I appreciate if you have limited time, so I've got like a couple more questions for you.
Yeah,
but
good.
As a tag on to this, the Saudis and the Emiratis saw this big rupture in their relations over Yemen in January because of operations down there.
Yeah.
So we've now, what I see and has, I think, largely been agreed on, a growing couple of blocks shifting the balance of power. It used to be Saudi Arabia, Iran, primarily the two major stakeholders. But now you have the Pakistanis and the Saudis, and I think it's Qatar in one block, and then the Israelis, Turkey, and then Qatar, Israel, and the Emirates in the other block, right? And they're trying to counterbalance. So what does that do for the energy architecture in the Middle East? Does it have any implications or not really?
It's a really interesting question. I'm not sure what it means for the energy architecture, but for just relations in the region, it's a very interesting question where this is going to go going forward. And there's also countries in the region are suffering varying degrees of pain. The Saudis they need the revenue more than some of the other countries just for their own fiscal reasons, but they also are able to export more of their oil than any of the other countries. The Qataris are generally not hurting for money, but on the other hand, their overwhelming source of revenue is completely shut down. And 2 of the 14 liquefaction trains are destroyed. And so, the Qataris are generally in a more comfortable fiscal position, but they are absolutely shut out of the market right now because there's no way to get LNG out. All of their facilities, their entire territory is inside the Persian Gulf, and it has nowhere to go. And so how long this goes on and how the politics of it sorts out, I think may change the balance of power around these countries. But I think it's also important to remember the levels of pain and the starting points of different countries, because that's going to matter too. Some are in better fiscal situations than others, and some are being hurt more because of where their facilities are and their ability to have workarounds.
So we've had an interesting guest on a couple of times called Anis Abhajar. He runs a very notable Substack. He primarily looks at oil and gas, but we had him on a couple of weeks ago during some of the height of the discussion around the Strait. And his emphasis wasn't so much about just energy security, it was also about the insurance and that everything. So can you explain that to me and everyone? What does that mean? Why is insurance such a big element of all of this, and how will that impact it?
Yeah, Iranian threats and insurance are one of the main reasons why the Strait is closed. It's not physically closed. But what Iran has done is made threats against ships, and in some cases shown that it's serious by hitting a few ships. I think it's more than 20 at this point. And so at that point, insurers either won't insure ships that are passing through the Strait of Hormuz, or the rates are astronomical because the risk is just too high. So at that point, the Strait is essentially closed, even though it's not mined or blockaded or shut in some physical way. And that also has implications for when the Strait opens again. From what I've read so far, and we're still early days, I haven't seen folks talk about a change in the insurance markets coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. And if you can't insure a ship to make that passage, passage doesn't happen. And so that's going to depend on the risk tolerance and the risk calculations and how the insurance companies understand the level of risk going to the Strait. And that's not going to change on a dime. They're going to want to see, really concrete assurances that those ships aren't going to be hit. And so this sounds a little silly, but where the rubber meets the road in terms of the Strait being closed is the insurance market as much as anything else.
Okay, and I guess then just a quick tag on to that, before I ask you sort of where does this go kind of question, but what should actors outside this be doing? If you were advising Europe, if you're advising different groups, how do we navigate this seemingly fragile, conditional ceasefire that's holding, right, and energy provisions and security associated with that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying for several weeks, the thing the world needs is a negotiated solution to this. Fragile ceasefires where we're not entirely sure that both sides agree on the particulars, it's a start. We're beginning to agree on something. But what we really need to stabilize energy markets and to frankly stabilize the global economy is you need a real peace agreement. I'm not sure where we're going to go or whether Iran is going to be better off at the end of this. They might be. You need a real agreement to open this, not just a fragile ceasefire we're not so sure about.
Okay, and that's the desired outcome. That's the preferred outcome.
Necessary outcome.
What's the realistic outcome? What would you encourage people to watch out for? What do you think is actually going to happen? Are the collapse and we're going to be in apocalypse now again, or is it or can we end on a light note with your contribution?
I hate to predict apocalypse. I can try to end on a light note. But in all honesty, the world really needs a negotiated solution to this. But we're in a situation right now where the Iranians see this as existential to their survival. And they're a theocratic regime. It's not just about their survival. It has religious notions to it. And then the U.S. doesn't want to be embarrassed. And, we have various things that our administration is thinking about. And we're going to have to find a way through the rock and the hard place in order to find a solution to this. Until we get that, it is going to continue to be rocky. And what you hope is that folks around the world, both allies of the United States and of the Iranians and other forces, come together and really put pressure on them to, look, you got to figure this out. Because the implications of the strait remaining closed are very serious, and we're not entirely feeling them yet because of the travel time. And so you really need a negotiated solution to this.
Can I be cheeky? Sorry, I know I keep saying last
Absolutely.
question. What do you think is the most likely scenario? If you had to map out worst case, most realistic, most optimistic scenarios, is it a case of a joint toll booth venture between the Omanis and the Iranians with some kind of unique input from the US and the Gulf states, or it's impossible to predict?
I think it's almost impossible to predict. I see people talking about a toll, I think because it feels like somewhere we can go now. But I really think we need to think about the implications of that toll for the Iranian regime going forward and for stability in that area. If that's the only place we can realistically get to, then I think we go there. But it's certainly not the outcome I prefer because of all the things I've talked about earlier.
All right.
I wish I had a light note to end on, but this is just a really tough one.
No, it's we can light up. There's a pun in there somewhere about oil and fire or something. Sorry, there's a pun in there.
There's got to be a joke in there somewhere. But actually, the real situation is really concerning, and I just keep talking about it.
Well, no, but Samantha Gross, Director of Energy Security and Climate Initiative at Brookings Institute. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. I do hope to have you back very soon.